So, we've now learned that there's lots of different types of radiation out there. Some of it's pretty cool. It could turn us into a superhero, like, hypothetically. Not really, but it could. But of all the different types of radiation, the really crappy thing about being a human being is that of all the different types of radiation, we can only see one type. And that's visible light, right? We're very limited as humans. And that there's all this type of radiation out there, but we can only see one variety. In fact, in this room right now, there are other types of radiation besides visible light, right? There's a little bit of heat in here, infrared. There's a little bit of residual UV radiation left over, right? We have visible light. There may even be small amounts of other types of radiation. Certainly your cell phone. If your cell phone's out and is on the desk right now, if it's on, it's emitting radiation. You just can't see it, right? So there's all this different type of radiation. We can only see visible light. So think about your eyeballs. That's the part of your anatomy that's responsible for detecting radiation, right? Your eyeballs, light comes in through our eyes, and on the back of our eyes is a retina. The retina is covered in these little photoreceptors. When light hits them, it causes a chemical reaction, which sends a nerve impulse to our brain saying, hey, we see light, right? Now, so think about your eyeballs. The metaphor I'm going to use is our eyeballs are kind of like an antenna, right? A radio antenna. But they're kind of a crappy antenna. You think about your radio antenna. The radios are great, right? You can get in your car, turn your radio on, and because we have really cool antennas, I can adjust to different stations, right? If I really want to listen to talk radio, I might tune it to like, NPR, like 91.5, or maybe I want to listen to country music, so I tune to 107.9 Camel Country, or maybe I want to listen to hip hop, I might adjust it to like 104.9. Or if I want to listen to classic rock, KSLX, right? KSLX is, I can't remember now. Let's say 97.9. You guys get the point though, right? I can adjust it. Our eyeballs are like a really crappy antenna that only tune to one station. It's like you are stuck with classic country and nothing else.
Oh no!
Oh no! Anyway, that'd be a nightmare. Wait. I'm not saying classic country's not good. I'm just saying. All I'm saying is you're stuck with that. That's all you can. That's all you can listen to, right? Because maybe your antenna is just not very good. Our eyeballs are like that crappy antenna. Of all the different types of radiation out there, there's only just the one set of stations we can tune into. Right? The other ones are out there, we just can't tune into them, right? We as human beings can only see visible light. Now, are there other animals that can see radiation besides visible light? Yes. What other animals are there?
Snakes.
Snakes are a great example. Snakes can see infrared. They can see heat. There's a great program on Discovery Channel called Planet Earth. Can you see that show, Planet Earth? It's awesome. In particular, there's an episode of Planet Earth. What Planet Earth does is it highlights a particular area of our ecosystem, like maybe deep underwater or maybe the rainforest. In particular, there's one episode of Planet Earth that focuses on the deep, dark depths of caves. And there's this episode where they show the inside of these caves and what lives in there. And there's a really cool part of this one episode where there are these bats that live deep in these caves, and they fly in and out of the caves at night, of course, to feed. And so when the sun goes down, the bats fly out the cave, they go feed on insects, and then they fly back into the cave before the sun comes up. Well, what they found out was there are snakes that actually feed on these bats. And what the snakes do is the snakes slither deep into the caves, and then as the bats wake up at night and fly out to go eat the bugs and fly back in, the snakes, they slither deep in the caves, and as the bats are flying by, the bats will strike and grab the bat out of midair and eat the bat. So they're not like slithering up the walls and eating the bats.
Oh my.
They're literally grabbing the bats as they're flying by. Now think about the inside of these caves. The inside of these caves are pitch black, no visible light. So how is it that the snakes are able to see the bats? because they can't see them with visible light, because there is no visible light at the bottom of the caves. How are they able to see the bats? It's because they can see the bats' what? Heat. Because bats are warm-blooded creatures. And so the bats can see that heat. That is cool. I wish I had that.
How is it that the bat's radar doesn't avoid the snakes?
I don't know. Maybe they don't realize that they're, or maybe they don't realize that they're a danger. I'm not sure. Now, can we as humans see heat? No. Certainly, bats can. Are there fictional creatures that can see heat? The Predator. You guys remember The Predator? Like one of my favorite movies from the mid-'80s, right? So this is if you've never seen The Predator, it's a classic. Right? This is Arnold Schwarzenegger at his best, the height of Schwarzenegger time in the 80s, right? This is before he was the governor of California, right? Classic cast, by the way, of this movie. It had Schwarzenegger. Do you guys know who the other politician was in the movie? Jesse the Body Ventura, who was a former wrestler and the former mayor of Minnesota. Carl Weathers, the actor that played Apollo Creed in the Rocky movies, was also in that movie. I mean, just a great cast. If you're not familiar with the movie, I'm gonna ruin the story for you a little bit. But so what it is Arnold Schwarzenegger plays the leader of this commando military group that is on a special mission in the jungles of, I don't remember, either Central or South America somewhere. I'm sorry for not remembering, but anyway, they're in the jungles, and they're on this special mission. And I don't even remember what the mission is, because we learned that as they're on this mission, suddenly the members of this elite commando group start to get picked off one by one, because there's this alien predator that is hunting them down and killing them off one by one, right? And eventually it gets down to the point where almost everybody's dead. About the only person left is Schwarzenegger and another buddy, and then this woman that they picked up at this village somewhere. Right? So at any rate, there's this moment when the alien is coming after him, and they're shooting at him and stuff, and then there's this famous scene, of course, right, where Schwarzenegger yells to the man and the woman. He says, "Get to the chopper!" You guys know that scene? Yeah. So they take off, and then so Schwarzenegger's running from the predator, right? And he trips and he falls and he slides down this ravine, and eventually falls off this waterfall down into this big pool of water. And then he swims to the edge, and as he pulls himself to the edge of the water, he thinks he's finally, he's escaped from the predator, and suddenly in the background you see the predator, boom, falls down into the water behind him, and so Schwarzenegger, he claws his way out of the water, and as he does so, as he's clawing his way out of this pond or lake, he gets covered in muck and mud, and he gets out of the water, and he's just exhausted, he's just laying there, and he's basically just, I'm going to die. And then the predator comes up out of the water, and the predator starts looking for Schwarzenegger, and Schwarzenegger, the predator can't see him. Schwarzenegger's like right there, like 5 feet away, and the predator's looking everywhere for him, and he can't see him. And you realize at that point that the predator sees not visible light. The predator sees heat, infrared. And he can't see Schwarzenegger because what? He's covered in mud. And what does that mud do? It acts as a filter, an infrared filter. It blocks that infrared so that it can't see Schwarzenegger, right? In fact, there's another photography term we learned here. Because Schwarzenegger's covered in the mud, he kind of matches the temperature behind him. They kind of like become the same color. And so you lose, in nature we would call that camouflage, right? So if I'm a hunter and I want someone to not be able to see me real well, I want to camouflage myself so I blend into the background. So in photography terms, what I'm doing is I'm decreasing what term? Contrast. Contrast is how much you stand out based on, for example, the background. If I am the same tone, color, as the background, then we would say that there's very little contrast. If you have a white object on a black background, that has a lot of contrast. Or vice versa. Or if you have something that is blue on a yellow background, that's high contrast. Yes, question?
Isn't that similar to like on green screens, a person in a green shirt?
Yeah, then you have no contrast, it just goes away. That's a good example.
That's the hardest thing.
So when Schwarzenegger wears or is covered in that mud, right, he has decreased the contrast between him and the background. It was kind of like camouflage. It masked him so he could not be seen. And so, of course, as we watch later in the movie, as he realizes that, he uses that to his advantage, and he covers himself in mud when he goes to do battle with the Predator, right? So, at any rate, watch the rest of the movie. It's pretty cool. Now, can we see heat the way the Predator does? No. Or the way that bats do? No. So, sorry, thanks. Snakes eating bats. Thank you. Now, there is one human that can see other types of radiation, but he's not real. He's one of my favorite fictitious characters, right? Raise your hand, be willing to be brave and admit it if you like Star Trek. Come on. Only 3 of you are willing to admit that you like Star Trek. Now, okay, now of the 3 of you, raise your hand. Are you Generations or are you original?
Original.
Next Generation or original?
What if you're both?
Original? Next Generation? Both? Okay.
Yes.
I'm more of a, okay, I'll admit, I'm more of a Next Generation kind of guy. Don't get me wrong, the original's fine. Captain Kirk, Spock, okay, cool. I liked Star Trek Next Generation. That was my favorite. That was the Captain Picard, Commander Riker. In particular, you know who my favorite character on Next Generation was? It wasn't Captain Picard. It wasn't Commander Riker. It was who? Remember, I'm a scientist. Who was my favorite character? Geordi LaForge. Exactly right. Do you guys know who Geordi LaForge is? Geordi LaForge was the engineer. That's right. So we're going to get to that. Geordi LaForge, played by the actor LeVar Burton. Do you guys remember LeVar Burton? He was the when I was a kid. He was the actor that was with a TV show on PBS, Reading Rainbow. You guys remember Reading Rainbow? Right. So Geordi LaForge on Star Trek. So he was the black guy, the engineer that wore the visor. That's Geordi, right? Really, let's be honest. He is the most important person on that ship. All right? Because if if Picard dies, somebody else can take over the ship. But if the warp drive breaks down,
You're done.
You're dead. You need that engineer to fix it, right? So anyway, that's why he's my favorite. But anyway, the reason I bring him up is he wears that visor, right? Question is, why does Geordi wear that visor? Now, everybody always says it's because he's blind. He's actually not blind. He's the opposite of blind. Blind is when you can't see. Geordi can see. It's just that Geordi can see all of the forms of radiation. So what happens is, with his eyes, for whatever reason, when he looks at something, he can see visible light, infrared, UV, cosmic radiation. He sees all of it at the same time. So think about it. His eyes become overwhelmed. It's kind of like when you walk out of a movie theater and it's been really dark and then suddenly you walk into the bright sunshine and it's like, whoa, it's almost like you go temporarily blind. So what do? You put on your sunglasses, or in Geordi's case, he has this visor which acts as a filter. So it allows him then to only see visible light. But there's a really cool scene in Star Trek where Geordi LaForge and Captain Picard and Commander Riker are trapped in a cave underground. And they need to get out. And they're going to use their blasters, their phasers to blast a hole in the cave. But they want to find out where the weakest part of the cave is. So Geordi takes his visor off so that he can do an analysis of the makeup of the rocks to figure out where would be the best place to put their phase blasts. And anyway, so I just raised everybody's geek level up by about like 5 notches. Yeah. Unfortunately, though, we are not Geordi, right? We do not see all the colors of we do not see all the different forms of radiation. We can only see visible light. Now, the good thing, though, is we can see small variations within the visible region, right? I said before, what is the difference between one type of radiation and another? It's all about wavelength, right? Well, guess what? That's the same difference between one color and another color. We can see radiation between about 400 nanometers and around 750 nanometers. Radiation that's around 400 nanometers is blue light. Radiation that's around 700 nanometers is red light. And in the middle, right around 500, 550 nanometers, that's green. So the difference between the different colors is red light is the longer wavelength, around 700 nanometers. Right? Blue light, you can see the waves are closer together. Again, if we were to measure them, the distance would be around 400 nanometers. And then green light, it's about halfway between. Now, what happens when we mix them all together? What happens when we take all the colors of the rainbow and we mix them all together? What do we get? White. White. So white light, if you take all the colors and you mix them together, I'm not talking about colors of crayons. I'm talking about colors of light. And that's an important thing to understand. Because when I talk about mixing colors, everybody goes back to when they were in kindergarten and they mixed crayon colors together. I'm talking about colors of light. That's your question just a second. So look at these overhead lights right now. They are white, or close to. The reason that they're white is because there's green light, blue light, and red light all coming out at the same time. And those are mixing together, producing white light. Now how do we know that? Because a really smart guy named Isaac Newton, years and years ago, I'm going to back up a couple slides here. Isaac Newton took a glass prism and shone white light through a glass prism. And what happens when you shine light through a prism? It breaks into the various colors. We see that red light, if we were to measure it, is 700 nanometers. Blue light, around 400 nanometers. We can see green around 550 nanometers. You can actually take, if you take a second prism, you can actually recombine them back together again. You can split the light and then recombine it back into white. So white light is a mixture of all the colors. So far, so good?